did you go to medical school?
At University of Pittsburgh.
And from there, tell us about your training.
Well, my last year at the University of Pittsburgh, I spent almost all of it at Harvard at Mass General. And after that, I was an intern at Columbia Presbyterian. And I was very anxious to go to Mass General, but I didn't get in. And after the first year at Columbia, they talked to me and said, you had to go to the Army because there's a draft going on and there's a war going on, and you can come back though and you can be the chief, but we want you to go to the Army so you can come back and we won't be worried that you'd be drafted. Well, I called Mass General then and they said, well, you were very close, come up here, we'll take good care of you. So I left Columbia Presbyterian and I spent the rest of my residency and fellowship at Mass General.
And you did a fellowship?
Well, as you know, at that point in time, there were no definite fellowships that were in endocrine surgery. Oliver Cope was then chief of endocrine surgery there, and he said, you stay here, you're interested in endocrine surgery, and you'll do nothing but work with us in the endocrine cases. At the meantime, you'll be doing research with John Potts in the development of the radioimmunoassay. So I would take call for the emergency rooms in general surgery. During the day, when there were no endocrine cases, I would be working on the radioimmunoassay. And when there were endocrine cases, I would scrub on all the endocrine cases.
Oh, wow.
So after that year, they said, well, why don't you stay on the staff? And so I stayed on the staff. I was honored to be on the staff. But then the Army got me. They said, well, you were in this very plan that you had signed up for, and now we want you to go to the Army. Mm-hmm. And so at that point in time, I said, gee, I have all this training. I hate to be sitting in a foxhole. I went down to Washington and I met General Whalen, and I told him about my work with the radioimmunoassay. He said, Monchik, he said, you're coming to Walter Reed. So I walked out of there. I thought I'd just run 100 yards for a touchdown. I told my wife, I said, we're going to Washington. She said, oh, she was so thrilled. And we moved to Washington for 2 years, and I had a great time in Washington. We loved it there. And then after that, it came to where I was going to go afterwards. And I would be the chief at where I am now at Brown, and I came there, the chief of endocrine surgery.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And so the time at Walter Reed, was it the early 70s or late 60s? When was it?
It would be in the 70s, about 74, 73. Mm-hmm.
So as you think back, the mentors that had the most influence on you, would that be Dr. Cope, and who else would be?
Well, Dr. Cope, Dr. Wong, with regard to the surgery, at that point in time, Dr. Cope was considered one of the leaders with regard to parathyroid surgery. He had done the most in America, at least the most of people who were writing about it. Dr. Wong was his associate, and then I joined that office, and so they were mentors. Dr. John Potts, who was then the chief of endocrinology, and came to Mass General from NIH. He was a great leader, and the lab was anytime, day or night, someone would be there working. There'd be exciting people coming from all over the world to work there. So I think it's a combination of not just the surgeons, but the medical people who I work with that helped me to fulfill my career aspirations.
Fantastic. So you started at Brown and loved it at Brown, and
I've never left.
Stellar career at Brown.
No, I've never left Brown.
And your career there at Brown, purely endocrine surgery, or doing lots of...
Well, when I came there in the 70s, there was really no one doing strictly endocrine surgery. So I was doing general surgery. I was on call for trauma. And then I'd say over the past 15 years, I do nothing but endocrine surgery. Mm-hmm. And at first it would be pancreas, adrenal, thyroid, parathyroid, and as things evolve, hepatobiliary surgeons doing 5 and 6 Whipple operations a week. I would help them do some insulinomas, but then they became extremely good. And I did the laparoscopic adrenalectomies, but I've given those now to my colleague. So right now I do thyroid, parathyroid.
Fantastic.